I've been told to stay in my lane and know my place and only talk about what I do best. So, here we go. Superman Smashes the Klan, a review. Superman Smashes the Klan is a retelling of the Clan of the Fiery Cross story arc from the Adventures of Superman radio show. The Superman radio show was the most popular radio show in the 1940s, and this 16-part story arc is credited with helping end the second version of the Ku Klux Klan. The comic book came out in 2019 during peak Trump derangement syndrome, so I ignored it because it seemed like yet another story playing into identity politics. However, I later found out that it was based on the radio show, so I was kind of interested, but completely forgot about it. It hadn't crossed my mind again until a few weeks ago when I was on a live stream and someone mentioned it. I vaguely remember some people complaining about the first issue when it came out because it was about the Klan. However, what people failed to mention or notice is that the story is set in 1946, which makes using the Klan make more sense. I also assumed that the story had been repurposed by writer Gene Luen Yang. He's Chinese and tends to write stories about Asian characters. When I saw that the main characters were Chinese, I assumed Yang took the original serial and swapped the races from black to Asian, either to avoid being accused of cultural appropriation or because of his tendencies. However, the original radio show story was about a Chinese family called the Lees. It's worth mentioning a quick history of the Ku Klux Klan for context. The Klan was formed in Tennessee in 1865, shortly after the end of the Civil War. Contrary to what some might think, the Klan were not heroes fighting against Southern mistreatment at the hands of the brutal North and the uppity Negroes during the Reconstruction era. They were terrorists who wanted to maintain the Southern status quo of white superiority and oppression of black people. They did this by targeting black communities, particularly freed slaves and black politicians, along with any white people who supported the black community, especially those the Klan considered to be Northern sympathizers. The Klan spread across the South and caused enough violence that in 1870 and 1871 the federal government passed the Enforcement Acts to address the Klan's rising power. Following that, the Klan diminished. However, it did succeed in running out, literally in some cases, blacks from political positions, and shepherding laws meant to control the black population. The Klan was essentially done. However, they rose again in 1915 thanks to a blockbuster movie called The Birth of a Nation. This D.W. Griffith film portrayed the Klan as heroes, protecting white women and children from the black people who wanted to indoctrinate the country with ideas of racial equality, desegregation, and miscegenation. The film was so popular that it led to the mass marketing of the Klan for profit, a thing the new Klan used to its advantage. They monetized the movement, requiring members to pay dues like they were part of some legitimate fraternal organization. The new Klan also expanded its hatred. Along with targeting blacks, Asians, and Native Americans, the second iteration now targeted Catholics, Italians, Russians, and the Europeans' favorite group to hate, Jews. This new version grew quickly, reaching nearly 8 million members by the 1920s, or about 10% of the US population. What did them in was infighting and crimes by its leaders, not against minorities, but against white people. People also called into their money scamming, so by the 1930s, the membership had dropped to about 30,000 people. When the Superman radio show took the Klan to task, in a way, it was beating an already dying horse. Yang mentioned in the essay at the end of the trade that it's not clear who came up with the idea for the story arc. However, the story itself had a massive effect, showing just how ridiculous and backwards the Klan actually was. One quick thing to note is that the show doesn't call the Klan by its actual name, but instead the Klan, with the C, of the Fiery Cross. This wasn't because they were trying to dodge talking about them, but because the Ku Klux Klan was a trademarked name, so a station could be sued for using it. There's no such concern today, so there's no reason not to use the proper name in the comic, but I guess Yang wanted to stick as close to the original radio story as possible. Before I get into the story, I want to talk about the art because it's absolutely phenomenal. It's drawn by Gurihiru, a Japanese art team, and they just nail it. I could nitpick here and there. There are some instances where Superman's leg is a little too long, or the perspective is slightly off, or a character isn't perfectly on model, but this is like whining that you got one less fry with a large fry. At first I wasn't sure about the art choice because while I love the art style, I thought a more traditional American style would suit the story, especially since it's set in the 1940s. However, Gurihiru manages to capture that feel. It's less Fleischer Brothers and more 90s animated series, but it still works. Gurihiru are excellent at finding those moments and scenes that would make perfect keyframes. They work in animation, so it's not surprising. And it makes you feel like you're watching animation instead of reading a comic. It's one of the best examples of visual storytelling I've seen in a while. A lot of the story relies on dialogue, I would say too much. However, Gurihiru finds a way to balance that, so that even without reading some of the necessary text, you still get what's going on. This is one of those instances where I just can't find a flaw. The art is perfect. Hands down, unquestionably perfect. The story, it's not bad. It's well told, just wordy, very bantery, which makes sense given that this was based on a radio show. I don't know how much of that Yang kept or added, but there are points where it seems like the characters are just talking to talk. It's not badly written or even out of place. It's just that sometimes the point's been made, but the scene keeps going. He tries to weave two different stories together, and it just doesn't work because they don't really tie in. The main story is about the Lees moving from Chinatown to Metropolis and the local clan of the Fiery Cross harassing them. The second is about Superman encountering Kryptonite for the first time and discovering his origins and the rest of his powers. There's nothing wrong with either of these stories on their own. It's that Yang doesn't connect them in any substantive way. The sole connection is that Dr. Lee is a scientist who's unknowingly working on a project for the Klan, who are using kryptonite to field weapons to kill Superman. This would be fine if Dr. Lee were the focus of the story, but he's not. He's barely in it. Instead, it's revealed through his daughter Roberta when she finds his notes near the end of the story. That said, the story works in general. It opens with Superman fighting the Atom Man. Yes, that's a swastika on his chest, and I know some people will complain that makes the story woke because God forbid we mention bad people from history. The story is set in 1946, so there would still be some holdover Nazi jackasses running around. Superman takes the Atom Man down easily, and when he tries to fly away, Supes knocks him out of the air with a rock. If you're wondering why he doesn't fly, well, that's because he doesn't have those powers yet. Originally, Superman couldn't fly, didn't have heat or X-ray vision, and there was no kryptonite. All of those came later, incidentally from the radio show. So, since he can't fly, Superman clocks the Nazi with the rock. But when he goes to find out what powers the guy's suit, Superman gets a solid dose of kryptonite. Of course, he doesn't know what it is and assumes it can hurt Lois and Jimmy, but it only affects him, causing him to feel sick and hallucinate. Inspector Henderson arrives and takes the device. When he puts the cover back on, Supes recovers. Kind of. He can still smell the kryptonite, and the smell won't go away. A nice little addition here is that Superman runs across the power lines. Superman isn't exactly light, so if he's able to run across the power lines, it implies that he's got some control over how much force he's placing on things, and that's probably something he's doing on purpose. That's going to be important later, so just keep it in mind. Then it moves to the Lees as they drive to their new home in Metropolis. The scene introduces Roberta and Tommy and sets up that Roberta has a sensitive stomach, but it also does a great job of setting up what it's like for immigrants, having to switch languages and names in order to fit in. When the Lees make it to their new home, they meet Dr. Lee's new colleagues. The chubby guy seems nice, but the other one is a dick. He's brought a pie, and when Roberta's mother thanks him in broken English, he says, "Don't mean to disappoint, but that good smell is apple, not dog." Now, I'm sure some people will claim no one was really like that. That's not true. It's said in 1946, and they didn't bite their tongues back then. As this is going on, Tommy apologizes to Roberta for making fun of her during the car ride, and as they head outside, they see Superman run by. And then, out of nowhere, Jimmy Olsen shows up. Now, here's the thing. I have no idea how old he's supposed to be. He mentions that he manages a baseball team, which would imply that he's older, maybe 17, 18, or 19, but then he's always around the kids, even outside of baseball practice, as if they were his classmates, so maybe he's 15 or 16. I have no idea. He invites the pair to the baseball practice, and it turns out that Tommy is an ace pitcher. That gets him lots of attention, but Roberta, not so much. She's very self-conscious and somewhat jealous of her brother, and she's not the only one. When Jimmy invites Tommy to join the team, Chuck Riggs ain't too happy that Tommy just took his spot, so he challenges Tommy to show him what he's got. Tommy warns him to step back, but Chuck ain't having it and calls Tommy a yellow banana, and I'm like, that seems mild. Most of my aunts and uncles grew up in the 40s, so I've heard tale of the litany of insults pissants like Chuck threw around, and they hit a little harder than yellow banana, but not as hard as his ball to the arm. I would have aimed for the face, but that's me. Tommy tries to apologize, but Chuck calls him a China boy. Closer, but still not right. Something's missing. Just can't put my finger on it. The priest chastises Chuck for the name calling, and Jimmy tells him to apologize. When Chuck won't, Jimmy fires him, and Chuck says, quote, "You kidding me, Olsen? We got the championship coming. You really gonna choose this ching chong over me?" There it is. That's the real deal. It was the venom that was missing. We got it now. We're gonna tackle some racism, maybe work some things out, but then the scene gets killed when Roberta, who has up to this point spoken fluent English, comes in with Chuck, no fighting, coward. What's happening? 3 pages ago, she was talking perfectly fine. Now she needs to take a breath to deliver this Shakespearean takedown? What I was asking is, are you the kind of coward who's willing to fight a girl half your size? Because that's what you'll have to do to get to him. How the hell does that become Chuck no fighting coward? It seems forced, like it's there to give Roberta something to overcome that ultimately doesn't mean anything because she never has this problem again. It would be one thing if, as a result of her mother only speaking Cantonese at home, Roberta's a little behind with her English, although she probably goes to an English-speaking school, so that really wouldn't happen. But it would make more sense than her randomly forgetting English for one scene. In the meantime, we get to meet Chuck's Uncle Matt, who's caring for Chuck and his mother. It's implied that Chuck's father died in World War II. Turns out that Uncle Matt is the Grand Scorpion of the Clan of the Fiery Cross. Chuck says that he's heard about these people, that it's a group of hateful bigots, and his uncle schools him on these, quote, lies perpetrated by corrupt newspapers and textbooks. See, he's got the right idea. He knows not to let the biased media and school board ideologues indoctrinate kids. And he doesn't hate anyone. This is about love of his nation, quote, a nation will crumble to dust unless its people are united as one. You understand? It is impossible to unite an impure people. One race, one color, one religion. I believe the correct phrase is white power. What, did they trademark that too? They didn't, but it would have been funny if they did. Meanwhile, Superman is still hallucinating. Yes, I know that's a sloppy segue, but it's in the book. It literally goes from, we gonna burn some crosses, to Superman hanging out with little green men. Just totally unconnected, which is why it immediately goes into a flashback of John giving the young Clark a radio that spouts out Kryptonian. Martha doesn't think it's a good idea to give it to him because she doesn't want him to know about his true origins. Then it goes back to the hallucination, where Soups is finally able to understand the aliens after he eats some soup. Then we're back to Roberta and her mother. This is in the book, this is how it flows, just no connections whatsoever. We're back to these two talking about how to feel at home. Just as Roberta's mother leaves, there's a light outside. It's a burning cross. Uncle Grand Scorpion spouts a lot of uncomfortably current talking points about keeping out the impure people, and Tommy decides to go and challenge them. Now, I'm pretty sure that the Lees would know who the Klan were, but the scene makes it seem like they don't know what's going on. It's very unlikely the parents haven't encountered blatant racism in the 1940s, and unbelievable that they wouldn't know who the Klan were and that they can't be reasoned with. The whole response here makes no sense unless the family literally just came to the States, and that's not what happened. At any rate, Uncle Grand Scorpion tells Chuck to throw a Molotov cocktail at the house. He does, but misses, and it falls back onto the Klan. As they run off in a panic, Roberta notices Chuck's red shoes. The Klan scatters, and then a group of black guys randomly show up and help put out the fire. However, Dr. Lee doesn't trust them and tells them to leave. Again, it's strange credulity that he wouldn't know how the Klan treats black people, so I just took this as a moment to show that even those targeted by racists can harbor prejudices of their own. In this case, Dr. Lee having a thing about black people. The next day, Lois, Clark, and Jimmy show up to investigate. After speaking with Roberta, Superman is reminded of an incident from his youth where he almost heat-visioned bullies who were picking on him and Pete Ross. It's a great scene to show how difficult it was for Soups growing up, how even his friends would be fearful of him because of his powers. This idea of the isolated Clark Kent is popping up more and more in Superman's stories, and I know some people don't like it, but I think it's fine if it's handled well. You know, the opposite of Man of Steel. It makes more sense here why Clark would need to learn to hold back his powers. He becomes dangerous if he doesn't, even though he's trying to protect his friend. And then it jumps back to Tommy and Roberta. No rhyme or reason, just two completely different stories. Anyway, Tommy wins over the other kids with this story about the cross burning, while Roberta thinks about the pesky reality that some of these kids might have been the ones who attacked their home. On their way home, Tommy and Roberta get into an argument over this. Roberta storms off, and later Tommy gets offered a ride by Uncle Grand Scorpion, who kidnaps him in broad daylight. Not that wouldn't have stopped him at the time, I'm just pointing out that somebody probably would have seen this if there were ever any people on the street. These are the emptiest streets I've seen in a long time. When Tommy doesn't show up at home, Roberta goes to find him but only finds his hat. She spots a cop car, and when she tries to get the cop's help, turns out he's racist. So Roberta runs to the Daily Planet, by herself, in the middle of the day, all the way downtown. How? She's nowhere near downtown Metropolis. How does she get downtown? How does she even know where to go, since it would appear she's never been to the Daily Planet? And why is it still the same time of day? If she ran, which I'm going to assume she did, it should be dark and the building should be closed. But let's say she took the bus or train to get there. Why would they let this obvious child into the building? And she just shows up and no one's like, whose child is this? Nope, she calls for Jimmy. He appears. She explains the situation and says she wants to know where Chuck lives. How about call your parents? Do they not have phones at your parents' jobs? Why would you go to find Jimmy Olsen and not other cops or your parents? Jimmy agrees to take her to see Chuck because why call the cops when two kids with no leads can hop on a scooter and talk to a sore loser? Of course, Superman overhears this and runs after them on a well-drawn but completely empty Metropolis street. Meanwhile, Uncle Grant Scorpion explains to Tommy how he's going to tar and feather the boy, essentially killing him, and adds this a little bit, quote, "Before we get started though, I want you to know that we don't hate your kind. Don't you believe the papers? There's not an ounce of hate in our hearts. It's just, I've seen the photos of Chinatown. Crowded, run down, drug addicts on every street, and my God, the filth. You people have every right to live how you want in your own country, but I will not permit you to bring your filth into my country. Understand?" God, that sounds so familiar. I wonder why. Anyway, Tommy manages to untie himself, sock the bigot, and jump out of the truck, hurting his arm. The Klansmen follow him and he jumps into the river to get away, but because of his arm, he can't swim. As this happens, Roberta and Jimmy show up at Chuck's place, and Roberta confronts Chuck, saying that she knows it was him who attacked her home because of his red boots. He loses it, attacking Jimmy and Roberta with a bat, but ends up cracking Superman instead. Turns out, the Klan baby is Superman's biggest fan, hence the red boots. Superman gets Chuck to admit that he knows where the Klan is, and on the way there, when Chuck points out where the meeting was, Roberta says, "The meeting of bigots and bed sheets, Chuck?" And he's like, "You don't have to be so disrespectful. Because remember, it's always important to be polite to the people who call you slurs, burn crosses in front of your lawn, try to firebomb your home, and kidnap and try to kill your brother. You wouldn't want to be rude to the people who literally don't want you to exist, would you?" They make it to the meeting spot and Superman tries to listen for Tommy but can't hear anything. He starts hallucinating again, this time of alien versions of John and Martha, who tell him to look through things, and now he's able to use his X-ray vision to find Tommy. Jimmy and the inspector show up, and Superman races Tommy to the hospital while Roberta and Chuck get a ride from the inspector. This is the first scene that kinda connects the two storylines, the leads and the origin story, and it's done in this weird way. Roberta has a finicky stomach and suffers from motion sickness. She got sick on the car ride to Metropolis and when Superman ran with her. In the car ride with the inspector though, she doesn't feel sick, and this makes her think about her ride with Superman. She says that the way he landed was weird, and that it felt like the laws of gravity didn't apply to him. This is supposed to be the setup for a later scene in which Roberta explains Superman's powers to him, and she gets this all from one ride. Just keep that in mind. In the meantime, Jimmy grills Chuck about what he knows, but Chuck gives up nothing. At the hospital, Superman goes to talk to his alien parents after dropping off Tommy, and they hint that he's not what he thinks he is. Supes then has a flashback to a Mrs. Braverman losing her mind over Clark being a demon. The sheriff doesn't buy it and sends Braverman and her kids on their way. Later that night, Clark overhears his parents arguing over whether to tell him the full truth about his origins, and they decide that Clark needs to be a perfectly ordinary boy. When the radio he's holding starts up, Clark runs away and tosses it into a lake, and the next morning everyone acts like nothing happened. Back at the hospital, someone finally called the kid's parents. Roberta goes outside to return Superman's cape, but he lets her keep it, and the mother turns it into a jacket. That's very sweet, but how come you're not mad that nobody called you when both of your kids went missing? I know it's 1946 and kids were allowed to run free until the streetlights came on, but honestly, this is ridiculous. Meanwhile, the Daily Planet puts out a reward for info on the Klan. Chuck's mother sees the paper and asks if he knows anything about it. He denies it, and it turns out she was just joking with him. She claims that she sees the Klan as criminals, but then goes on to say, quote, "But is it really all that bad to want to live among only your own kind?" Proving that she's not that different from those criminals. Chuck goes to warn his uncle, and stumbles onto the man getting ready to bomb the Unity House, where all the mostly white kids go to hang out. The kids at the Unity House welcome Roberta and Tommy, and it seems like they're starting to get along. Chuck comes in and starts blathering about getting out of the building without telling anyone why. He manages to convince everyone to go and see a movie just as the Klan shows up. It then cuts to Lois, who hasn't been in the story for pages, stumbling onto an experiment being done on the Atom Man in the hospital. Does it make any sense to have this happen here? Nope. Just two stories mashed together. It then goes back to the kids at the theater, and Roberta bumps into some old Chinatown friends. Now, you may recall that she had that hiccup with English back at the beginning of the story, so you'd think she'd speak Chinese to her old friends. But no. She speaks English, and so do they. Perfectly fluent English, meaning she would never have a reason to say, "Chuck, no fighting, coward." Turns out, though, that her friends weren't really as close as she thought. They took her insecurities as her being standoffish and thinking she was better than them, so they don't really want anything to do with her. Back in Metropolis, Superman blows a meeting with Lois when he hallucinates about his alien parents, and Lois assumes he's staring at a pretty woman. Supes confronts his parents, and they ask why he's only half of who he actually is, and there's another flashback to Clark as a kid, this time being bullied outside of church. Lana Lang comes to his rescue as his powers start to kick in, but he pushes them away, and since then, he hasn't had any of those abilities. He just wants to fit in without people being afraid of him, so he abandons his alien parents. It's an interesting take on why Superman only had some of his powers for a while. The idea that he's holding back fits with the established canon. Superman rarely goes all out because he's too destructive. That works. What doesn't work is the next scene where Roberto sees a character flying in a movie and realizes no human could defy gravity like that, and somehow connects this to Superman, who she's only met a couple of times. She wants to tell Tommy, but he's not there. He and Chuck are outside practicing, but Roberta isn't having it and reveals that Chuck was the one who threw the bottle at their home. Chuck apologizes and Tommy believes him, saying that Chuck is too good to miss, so he must have missed on purpose. Chuck claims this is true, saying that he doesn't want to hurt anybody, and then lets it slip about the Unity House and his uncle being the Grand Scorpion, who he continues to defend as a good guy deep down. Nope, he's a bad guy. You need to be able to recognize evil when you see it, like when it tries to murder your new best friend. Jimmy walks in and the kids decide to go and try to stop the bombing. They spot some Klansmen climbing through the windows. Presumably those dudes have been here this entire time, at least a couple of hours, and never noticed the kids leave and decided to wait until the not cover of darkness to sneak into the second floor window visible hundreds of yards away. I know the Klan is dumb, but come on. Jimmy sends the boys to call the cops in the Daily Planet while he and Roberta go to confront the bigots in bedsheets. Superman overhears the call to the planet, which again Lois mistakes him for checking out another woman. Back at the Unity House, Jimmy and Roberta trade insults with the bigots in bedsheets, and then Supes shows up to take out the trash. Of course, he only needs one of them, so he hangs one out to dry and takes the other inside, demanding to know where he planted the bomb, but the guy won't give it up. Superman finds the religious leaders tied up and frees them and tries to find the bomb using his X-ray vision, but he can't get it to work before the bomb goes off. Back at the Daily Planet, the inspector confronts Perry White about running the ad. It basically tipped off the Klan, making it harder for the cops to find them. Not that it matters since the Klan shows up at the planet. Back at the Unity House, Jimmy and Roberta realize that that's where the rest of the Klan would be, for some reason, and we get to see just how far Roberta had to run to get to the planet to find Jimmy. That's at least several miles away. You ran miles to find Jimmy Olsen instead of going back home and calling your parents. Also, somehow the Klan managed to put a burning cross on the planet on the Daily Planet. How they got all the way into the building, to the roof, and painted a 50-foot cross on a metal surface is totally beyond me, but that's what happened. So then we get another flashback, although this one happens at the start of the third issue, so it's not as jarring. This time it's of a carnival. Superman sees a strong man and gets inspired. In the middle of the performance, lightning strikes the tent, and Clark saves the strong man from being eaten by a lion. They have a chat afterwards, and Clark says that he's always been afraid to show his powers because he didn't want people to be afraid of him. And the strongman says that he solved that problem by wearing a colorful costume. So this is the reason for Superman's supersuit. It cuts back to the present. Superman races to the top of the Daily Planet just as Jimmy and Roberta arrive, and Roberta notes that climbing the building is so slow. Jimmy says it's not like Superman can fly, and Roberta thinks, I don't know. No, you don't know, because there would be no way for you to know. Because you've only met Superman a couple of times and you don't know diddly squat about his powers. You don't know that he can fly. There's just no logical way for that to happen. It's totally contrived, like Superman forgetting that he can jump. It's his thing. Faster than a speeding bullet, more powerful than a locomotive, able to leap tall buildings in a single bound. Look, up there in the sky. It's a bird. It's a plane. It's Superman climbing a building with his hands. Not jumping, climbing. Let's just move on. The Klan races by Jimmy and Roberta in the pickup truck, and the pair go to the planet to help and meet up with Superman. They find out that the Klan that they just saw kidnapped Perry, Lois, and the inspector. Roberta spots a clue, 2 initials written in lipstick, that Roberta guesses refers to her father's co-worker William Jennings, because there's nothing else WJ could possibly mean. Superman races to save Lois and the others. Meanwhile, Chuck and Tommy have a little chat. Chuck admits that trying to blow up a building with people in it was absolutely wrong, and you can feel it coming. But is it really all that bad to want to live around only people like you? It's a perfect demonstration of how bigoted people can be completely disconnected from the harm they do. At this point, Tommy's had his home attacked, his arm broken, and was almost murdered, and has been willing to let all of that slide just to fit in, but none of that matters to Chuck. All that matters to him is this: I want to know that my family's not evil. But they are evil. Trying to kill someone because they're different from you is evil. Hand waving that away because you think it's bad but you still only want to live around your own kind is evil. Expecting the people you terrorize to try to see things from your point of view is evil. This scene points out an interesting tendency among bigots. They often want others, especially those they hate, to see the best in them. They never consider their victim's perspective, how much those people put up with and have to give up in order to fit in. Instead, they make excuses and try to argue that they're really not bad, and it's actually unfair to think they are. And Tommy does what you're supposed to do in that situation: walk away. Elsewhere in Metropolis, the bigots in bedsheets harass Lois and the others while making complete fools of themselves. Superman shows up and trounces them with ease, and afterwards he confronts Uncle Matt and finds out just how unhinged this dude actually is. He thinks Superman is one of them, one with pure blood, living proof of the superiority of the white race. And Superman is like, nah, son. But as we see with the cop, everyone doesn't share Superman's opinion. Then we get to the most bizarre scene in the comic. Superman takes Roberta home. Why Superman is doing this when he left her with Jimmy, Lois, and the others who could have taken her home at any time isn't explained. But the reason is so Roberta can tell Superman how his powers work. She tells him that when he lands, he's defying gravity, and that's not really leaping, but flying. She explains that he's holding himself back, limiting his powers, hiding the things he can do that no human can do, because he's afraid that if people find out, they'll stop calling him Superman and call him Super something else. I have a question. Why hasn't Lois figured this out? Lois has spent more time with Superman than anyone else. Why would some random girl who's spoken with Superman 4 times manage to figure out his powers, in a way even he doesn't understand, but not the award-winning reporter? None of this makes any sense. There's no reason for Roberta to assume Superman can fly based solely on how he lands. And that brings us back to the point I made about Superman running on the power lines. He seems to be able to control how much force he exerts on the things around him. You'd think he would notice the way he jumps and lands, especially as his powers develop. He has to be so careful not to destroy things or hurt anyone. So wouldn't he have noticed how he lands? After all, he didn't forget that he had the other powers, so he would know he could at least hover if he wanted to. So why would Roberta be the one to explain this to him? It seems like this was just done to give Roberta something important to do with Superman, but it just doesn't work. There's no reason she would be the one to figure this out, and it comes across as pushy for her to do it, which is why Superman is like, okay, I'm gonna leave. Let's not talk for a while. However, he runs all the way to Smallville, tells his parents that they'll always be his family, and then goes to the lake where he threw away the radio, Lake Solitude. The radio has now built a fortress under the lake. How deep is this lake, and how is it possible that no one in Smallville ever noticed it? There's no way it's been here for decades and no one noticed. Anyway, Superman goes in and meets his parents, and they tell him his origin story. Meanwhile, Uncle Matt goes to see the Grand Imperial Mogul, who turns out to be the guy who hired Dr. Lee, the nice fat one, and he's pissed. Not that Matt failed, but because of Matt's actions, because it's tarnished the Klan's name, costing them thousands of dollars in their membership drive. See, the Mogul isn't a true believer. He's in it for the money, and used his connections to get a hold of a green stone that was used to infuse the Atom Man's blood, giving him Superman-like powers. The Mogul was there during the fight between Superman and the Atom Man, and saw how the stone weakened Supes. So he's gotten a hold of the Atom Man, and with Dr. Lee's help, extracted the kryptonite from the Atom Man's blood and weaponized it. He's also theorized that Superman isn't of this world. As he's monologuing back at the Lee's home, Roberta discovers her father's notes and his sample of kryptonite contained in a lead ball. These two scenes are the only other connections between the Klan storyline and the Superman origin storyline, and it's barely passable. There's nothing of any substance tying them together. At any rate, the Mogul tries to kill Matt for screwing up his plans, but fanatics can be hard to kill, and Matt manages to kill the Mogul instead. Then there's a baseball match. It seems to come out of nowhere, but Chuck did mention way back at the beginning of the story that the championships were coming up. This is the only other time it gets mentioned, but hey, we're almost done. Roberta goes to try to find Lois to show her the lead ball she found, but gets snatched by Uncle Matt, who proudly walks onto the field and declares white power. He's decked out in kryptonite weapons and expects Chuck to stay by his side, but Chuck finally sees evil for what it is and cracks the bigot with the bat. The other kids take shots at him, and he decides to nuke them with the kryptonite weapon, but then gets eye-beamed by a very pissed off Superman. The people are frightened of Superman, but not Lois, and that's enough for him. He then spills the beans about being an alien, and this gets people to side with the Grand Scorpion because he claims the Klan protects America from all foreign threats, and Superman is the greatest one of all. And they just switch sides, no problem. How many times has Superman saved people? How many times has he proven his trustworthiness? You find out there's one thing different about him and then just turn on him. So the Grand Scorpion shoots Superman with a kryptonite gun, and Roberta realizes that the only thing that can stop it is lead, like her father's lead ball, which she just happens to have in her bag. She tosses it to Supes, who uses it to clog the barrel of the gun, and somehow both of them survive the explosion. Of course, it's not over. The Grand Scorpion goes full Taliban, but forgot that now Superman can fly and use freeze breath, even though Supes doesn't know how he can do it. Matt concedes that Superman is superior, and then asks why Superman would fight for the Lees, and Superman says, "Where I'm from, we take care of our own." And Matt says, "You're calling the Lees your own? You've been brainwashed by corrupt newspapers and textbooks, Superman." Why does that sound so familiar? The Lees aren't your own. You share no blood with them, no history. There's literally nothing that binds you together. That's been the Klan's point all along. And Superman says, "But we are bound together. The Lees and I, our friends at the planet and the Unity House and the police department, everyone down there, really. We are bound together by the future. We all share the same tomorrow. That includes even you, once you've renounced your hate and paid for what you've done." That's a powerful message, and one that's unfortunately been lost on a lot of people lately. It's interesting that so many people who look up to superheroes fail to embody the morals and ethics of those characters they idolize. They're like Chuck, expecting an exception to the rules, just for them, just enough to allow them to have their biases, and when they're reminded that everything's not always about them, well, that's when the kryptonite knives come out. Luckily for Matt, Superman is Superman, so he saves Matt. That wouldn't happen in real life. Same goes for Tommy inviting Chuck to hang out. You'd need some time before you let that whole "your uncle tried to murder my sister in front of hundreds of people" thing go. Couple of weeks at least. The story ends with Roberta trying to return a pen that Lois had given her, partly because she thinks the pen is too expensive, and because it has Lois's initials. However, Lois, ever the good reporter, did her homework, and so knows Roberta's real name. The initials aren't for Lois Lane. They're for Lan Shin Lee. And that's how the story ends. Overall, great story. It does feel like two completely separate narratives held together with bubblegum and that stuff that they use to clean up vomit, but overall, the story works. It's worth checking out, although I do have to mention that the size of the book is different than normal. It's smaller than a regular trade, but larger than manga. It's about the size of a trade novel, which works with the comic book format. However, because the original book was printed at the normal size for comic books, when they reduced it to this new size, they left everything as is, including the font, so the font size is smaller than normal. It's not enough to make it hard to read, but I did find it distracting. Other than that, it's a solid book. It's definitely worth buying, if for the art alone, but also for the story as well. Now, there are probably going to be some people who won't want it because it's woke. And if that's the attitude, then maybe this book isn't for you, even though you are the intended audience. But what do I know? I'm just some guy.